Good evening, everybody. Welcome to class number 4 of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Several of you have been very quick with suggestions here tonight for what we should talk about. Chris, I'm going to start with your suggestion here because Brian has a suggestion too, which is that he wants to discuss the cards. We're totally discussing the cards. I haven't yet planned out, Chris, how to approach addressing your topic, which I'd really like to do. But it kind of sounds to me more like something that it would be really good for somebody to do at a conference. Anyway, Chris Swank's suggestion is, she says, we should discuss the feigned books and periodicals the novel quotes, like A Child's History of the Raven King, etc., and compare their usage with the corpus of Princess Irulan in Dune. It's, of course, a great comparison and a very interesting one. One of the things... let's come back to that. Let's keep thinking about that, and we'll definitely include that. I have scheduled a sort of a bonus class at the end, and at the very least, I promise we'll talk about that by the time we get to the end, sort of looking back at the big picture, because I do think it's an interesting big picture question to sort of say, overall, what is the impact of those quotations and footnotes? And as you say, Chris, it's not just the footnotes, right? It's the citations in the footnotes, which themselves are so interesting, and I agree they have a really big impact. So let's keep thinking about that. I'm not quite ready to talk about that tonight, mostly because, again, I want to get closer to the end so we can look at sort of the bigger picture patterns of that. But anyway, hi, good evening, everybody. Before I get, Tom Hillman has a great suggestion. He says, we should do a panel on the subject of fake books at Mythmoot 4. That's a great panel title. I agree. Anyway, okay, so before we get too far in, I wanted to do quick announcements here, because, of course, as I said last week, of course, we're in the middle of heavy announcement season. We're in the middle of our fundraiser this year, which has been going really well. We have... let me see. Here's the page that I wanted to show. This is our annual fun page, just to sort of share that. So as you can see, we are almost 3/4 of the way to our initial goal, which is awesome. People have been very generous. I wanted to explain this bottom rather peculiar measuring stick down here, and this is connected with the event that we had last night, the Where's Wigand event, where I was doing a sort of a quick tour through some interesting places in Lord of the Rings Online and talking about the kind of adaptation choices they have made, and sort of some of the kind of adaptation and subcreation they've done in Lotro, which I find so interesting. And we announced a sort of a sub goal that if we raised $5,000 to support the Lotro event, so people mention the Lotro events in their donation pledge, that we're going to do a special event where there's this weird sort of funny thing that you can do in Lotro, where you can turn yourself into a chicken and go across Middle-earth in the form of a chicken, which, of course, as you can imagine, is spectacularly dangerous because there are lots and lots of things that try to kill you. That we'd said that if we raised $2,000 between last night and the other Lotro event at the end of the time, that we'd do an event where I would become a chicken and people would try to get me to Rivendell. We've made Rivendell. If we get to $5,000, then we're going to go all the way to Helm's Deep. And they're gonna deliver me to Theoden. Though some people last night were joking that we should, of course, that the superlative destination for the chicken quest, of course, should be Amon Hen, which, of course, I found it hard to disagree with. So, anyway, we'll see. But it would be a very long walk from the Shire, either to Helm's Deep or to Amon Hen, and I'm going to steer the chicken myself. Some people sort of take a shortcut on this and make the chicken automatically follow some much more intimidating person. I'm going to steer the chicken myself, and so it will be a rather peculiar walking tour of Middle Earth. It should be a lot of fun. So anyway, I just wanted to explain what the chicken crossing the road indicator was down here. It's showing our progress towards our $5,000 goal. So anyway, again, if you would like to donate to Signum and have your donation count towards making the chicken event happen, then you can just mention Lotro in the dedication line of your gift, and we will make sure to count it towards the chicken quest. So anyway, again, thanks again to everybody who has donated. It means so much to us, and really helps us to carry on. The $20,000 will really keep the lights on for the whole year, and that just is such an important thing. Signum, of course, is a totally tax exempt institution, so your donation in America is tax deductible. As I should say, it's tax deductible in America. So I just wanted to make sure everybody knew about that. The fund drive is going to be going on for another few weeks. This is for our annual fund, so we'll be going throughout the year, but our campaign will be going on for another couple of weeks here, up through our big webathon extravaganza on Halloween Day, which is shaping up to be really cool. We're going to have a special lecture by Dimitra Fimi on Halloween and the roots of Halloween in literature, which should be really cool. We're going to do another special Lotro event. We're going to do a special film event. I'm going to do my other my special Mythgard Academy bonus one-off class where we're going to be looking at the Father Christmas letters. It's going to be great. It's going to be an awesome day. So anyway, that's actually the other thing I wanted to just say really quick, just to remind you of upcoming events. The two things most immediately upcoming here is first our special event with fantasy author Jim Butcher, live next Tuesday evening, October 13th. Jim Butcher, of course, is the author of the Dresden Files and the Codex Alera. He is my favorite modern fantasist, and he's a big Tolkien fan. We're going to be talking with him not only about his books and about Tolkien, but we're going to be talking about adaptation. We're going to get we're going to let him weigh in on the film project, and we're going to probably ask him embarrassing questions about the not, I think, very good adaptation of the Dresden Files, which aired on Sci-Fi. If you saw it, you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, and then the other one that I wanted to draw your attention to is in about a week and a half, on Thursday the 22nd, I'm going to be doing my special Mythgard Academy one-off class session on Doctor Who. And I'll tell you, I haven't 100% decided, but I'm now very strongly leaning towards doing Blink is what we're going to do. I think I'm only going to do one episode, Karita. I can't possibly do more than one. I mean, that would be that would be insane. But yeah, and Patrick, I'm almost caught up. I'm just finished episode 10 of season 8, actually. So, well, I should say I'm almost caught up on Netflix. I haven't been watching season 9. And anyway, I'm almost caught up through season 8 on Netflix. So yeah, I think I'm gonna go. Blink has been the one that has gotten sort of the most informal votes. But anyway, yeah, Karita, it would be doing more than one Doctor Who episode during a single class would be even more insane than trying to run in the form of a chicken all the way across Middle Earth. So anyway, yeah, I'm hoping that I'm sure that talking about Blink is going to be fun. So I'm looking forward to that. So that's going to be on Thursday night, October 22nd, at an earlier time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. So yeah, Karita, Blink is very high on my own favorites list as well. And of course, for the purposes of this little one-shot class, I wanted to make sure to choose an episode that is really pretty self-contained. So it's not going to require a whole lot of overarching plot setup. That was something I thought was pretty important. one of the reasons I've been laboring over this choice is that I really, really want to get something with Matt Smith and the Pawns, because I'm a huge fan of Matt Smith and the Pawns. So I've been kind of wavering on that one. But I think in the end, I think I'm going to go with Blink. Anyway, okay. So that's, again, Thursday, the 22nd at 7 p.m. And next Tuesday, October 13th at 8 is our conversation with Jim Butcher. So those are our next two big events that are coming up. Okay. All right. With that said, let's yeah, I know, Karita, it rules out a lot of episodes. There are a whole bunch of episodes that I really liked that I would love to talk about, but so many of them were, like the ones building up to the season finale and one of the seasons or another, and those I just felt like it would be really hard to do. David, the Doctor's Wife is high on my list. It is. I like that episode a lot, but I think in the end, I think I'm going to end up going with Blink. I'm pretty sure that's where we're going to be. That's where we're going to be headed. But okay. Let's get to Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. So, we just left off last time, after looking at Vinculus and his prophecy, looking at sort of the what he claims to be sort of a message from the Raven King, or the prophecy of the Raven King. And so I'd kind of gone backwards to look at that at the end of class last time. And now we're jumping back forward, though it's still last class's reading assignment, to look at Childermass is finally sort of tracking down Vinculus and confronting him to find out where exactly he is getting what he's saying, and so Childermass doing his research here and trying to get Vinculus in trouble. I loved Childermass' strategy, right? How he was trying to he was trying to entrap Vinculus into giving him a spell to enchant one of the virgin daughters of the king, thinking that they could use that as leverage to get the king to oust Vinculus. A really clever and rather ruthless plan on the part of Childermass, I have to say. But anyway, we're going to jump ahead a little bit from there. We're not going to talk about the improbable milliner. Rather, we're going to talk about the conversation about Vinculus's book, as Vinculus claims to have read the prophecy from a book, which seems to be the most surprising thing to Childermass, and of course, through him to Mr. Norrell, that Vinculus could possibly have said. Okay, so where are we? There we are. Okay. Quite. So, since you did not write this prophecy yourself, where did you find it? For a moment, Vinculus looked as if he would not answer, but then he said, "It is written in a book." "A book? What book? My master's library is extensive. He knows of no such prophecy." Vinculus said nothing. "Is it your book?" asked Childermass. "It is in my keeping." "And where did you get a book? Where did you steal it?" "I did not steal it. It is my inheritance. It is the greatest glory and the greatest burden that has been given to any man in this age." "If it is really valuable, then you can sell it to Norrell. He has paid great prices for books before now." "The magician of Hanover Square will never own this book. He will never even see it." Okay, what do we see here? What do we learn now? Again, this is one of those places where it's a little bit hard, I know, when you have read the whole book and you now know this. Of course, this conversation sounds so much different now. Remember, I'm still just on my second time through the book. Sounds much different now the second time through than it did the first time through. But I want to continue to try to talk about the story within the frame of the story. We can go back later on and comment about how things that are revealed later on change what we saw earlier on. But I want to try to limit that as we go through. And the reason, again, as I think I've explained before, but the reason I want to do this is that I find one of the things that Clarke does really, really well throughout this book is the revelation of information. The way that she manages how much we know and how we figure out what we know, I think is very masterfully done in this book. It's one of the things which, on a sort of a purely technical level, that is purely technical in terms of how she establishes, how she executes this story as a sub-creation, the way that she manages that is, I find, entirely remarkable. It is, she has very, very great discretion. She withholds so much, and not just sort of spitefully. There are sometimes, spitefully I say, there are sometimes, I think, when authors sort of create mystery simply by withholding information in a way which I guess I would kind of call a little bit cheap. That is, they describe a scene but they leave a thing out, right? And then later on tell you, there was also this other thing that I didn't tell you about, right? Not great mystery writers do that kind of thing. That's not the kind of withholding of information that I'm talking about. The kind of thing I'm talking about is the much bigger picture stuff. The way in which, as from the beginning of the class, we've been talking about, like even the question of what exactly is English magic. What is magic? How does it work? I don't think we've almost never seen anybody do magic yet. We're a quarter of the way through the book, and there's been one spell described, not spells working described, but the actual doing of it by a person. We see the stones in the York not minstrel, not minster, speaking, but we don't see Mr. Norrell casting the spell. He does that from his house, right? We see the description of the illusion of the ships that are blockading the French ports, but we don't see Mr. Norrell casting that spell. He's back in England, right? Many times we are told about her. We see the results of a magical spell, but we've not. The only time that I can think of to this point in the book, to the end of last week's reading, through book one, the only time that I can think that we see anybody do magic is Jonathan Strange at the end when he conjures up that vision of Mr. Norrell in the basin. I can't think of any other examples of any time we've seen somebody do magic sort of live on stage, as it were, right? That to me is that's the kind of withholding of information that I'm talking about. That's the things that the book as a whole is sort of taking for granted entirely, and leaving us to sort of figure out and kind of piece through and almost kind of acculturate ourselves within, which I think is really cool. But anyway, you guys have here, as I've been chattering along, been making some really good observations, which I want to go through. Okay. Yeah, good. Oh, Nancy, what a marvelous point. Nancy has noticed very sharply that he noticed that he does not say that he read it in a book. He said, it is written in a book. That is a very carefully phrased sentence, Nancy. That's well noticed. I hadn't been thinking about that, but of course you're absolutely right. Very good. Yeah, James is thanking me for my discretion on behalf of the people who are reading the book for the first time. That, James, of course, is another reason why I want to do it. But yeah. Good. John Moline makes an interesting point. I'm not sure I 100% agree with you, but he says Vinculus seems a bit less scoundrelly than the other Yellow Curtain magicians. Sort of. I think I would qualify that. He seems to be every bit as much of a scoundrel in the sense that he's a pickpocket and a charlatan and all that kind of thing. But there's more to him. He's not only a scoundrel. He is not merely somebody who is using his role as a street magician to beg and steal. He does do that, but it's not only that. And this is what I think. This is why I wanted to talk about this passage, John, because I do think that we can see what is there, what is the something more for Vinculus. Remember, Norrell wanted to just dismiss him. I mean, of course, he did dismiss him from his presence, but when he started spouting his message, his prophecy from the Raven King, Mr. Norrell wanted to be like, oh yeah, everybody does this, right? Oh, how unoriginal, Mr. Scoundrel Street Magician. You're going to spout a message to me from the Raven King, right? Everybody does that. But there seems to be something different about Vinculus. And we looked at it last time when the very first thing that he says to Mr. Norrell, he gets Mr. Norrell exactly right. Like he hits Mr. Norrell on a sensitive point, right? That he's delayed so long. And Mr. Norrell recognizes, yes, it's true. I was ready years ago. That opening exchange between the two of them, I think, sets a really important tone, right? So that even when Mr. Norrell is just wanting to lump him in with all the other rascally magicians, Mr. Norrell, in doing that, is being almost a little bit dishonest. That is, he sort of felt it too. There was some significance to the first thing that he said. If his opening remark is sort of meant to, or is supposed to establish sort of his credentials as a prophet, it did a pretty good job, actually. But Mr. Norrell doesn't want to confess that, right? He sort of is comforting himself with the idea that he's just another scoundrel like everybody else. Carita, that's a really great observation. Carita points out that both of the very careful answers that Vinculus gives, it is written in a book and it is in my keeping, have the sound of technically truthful answers in fairy tales. And Carita, I would even take that one step further to say technically truthful answers given by fairies, right? I mean, that's the way fairies talk. They say a thing which is technically true, but they are saying it in order to deceive you or in order to lead you to come to a wrong conclusion or to carry on with the wrong conclusion you are already you have already come to, right? So I agree, Carita, even before we know sort of the answer to this mystery, even before we understand the truth about Vinculus's book, we can, if we have a carefully tuned ear here, I agree with you, we can detect that sense there. Is it your book? Answer, it is in my keeping. And the evidence there, the sort of trademark of that kind of response is the indirectness of the response, right? You can see, where did you find it? The logical, simple answer would be, I found it in a book, or I read it in a book, right? Just like Nancy said, but that's not what he says. It is written in a book, he says instead. Is it your book? It is in my keeping. He's not exactly answered the question, though he has said something which makes it sound like. And so, of course, when even Childermass picks up on that, right? On the fact that it sounds like he's equivocating. Is it your book? It is in my keeping. Okay, so if it's not your book, but it's in your keeping, there's a pretty obvious explanation for that, right? Where did you steal it, right? Why, so you're holding somebody else's book. But that's not. But he says now unequivocally, I did not steal it. It is my inheritance. It is the greatest glory and greatest burden that has been given to any man in this age. Carita, notice how this is now riddling talk, openly riddling talk, right? It is the greatest glory and the greatest burden that has been given to any man in this age. That's a riddle that begs to be understood now, right? So it's now it seems relatively plain, that register that he is kind of operating in there. Kristen is sort of, suggesting, of course, there is, the alternative to the stealing interpretation is that he has some sort of stewardship over it, right? That it's not his book, but it's in his keeping. Exactly. Good. Kate. Kate, of course. Sorry, Kate is referring back to what I was saying before about the slow way in which things are revealed over the course of the book. Kate is pointing out that this mirrors the growth in knowledge of Strange and Norrell and others. Yeah, it does, and it's one of the things that I think makes this book so successful. as a sub-creation, because it really brings us as readers into the position. There are some things that we are very ignorant compared to everybody else. Everybody else was raised on stories of the Raven King and English magic, and that's just sort of as natural as anything to them, and we don't really know anything about that. And yet, there are many things about what magic actually is and how it really works that we're on the same footing with everybody else, right? I mean, remember, even Drawlight and Lascelles, who are trying to use Mr. Norrell and his magic, don't understand it, right? When he starts talking about raising Lady Pole back, or these almost, not quite Lady Pole, back from the dead, they assume he's joking or something, right? They haven't the faintest clue that is a thing that could actually happen, right? Again, so, and we sort of share their ignorance and perhaps their surprise. Chris Swank, you're absolutely right. There is no better way to annoy Norrell than to tell him there is a book relating to magic somewhere in England that he has never seen, never even heard of, and he cannot have it for any price, and that it is in the keeping of a yellow-curtain charlatan like Vinculus is the cherry on top. Absolutely. Isn't it just awful? And Chris, you do sort of get the sense that one of the that Vinculus enjoys that. Right? The magician of Hanover Square will never own this book. He will never even see it. Right? And Chris, I think when I was reading it through the first time, that's what I thought was that's how I read the sort of riddling speech by Vinculus here. I read that as him taunting Norrell through Childermass. Right? And not only that, but even sort of trying to protect himself. Right, so long as Norrell believes there is an important book of magic that he's never even heard of, and that Vinculus alone knows, he's not going to do anything too extreme, right? In fact, he may even protect him or something, because he's going to just be burning with curiosity. So I saw that as a play by Vinculus, and I think it is a play by Vinculus. But you're absolutely right that it's. I agree with you that it is delicious plotting by Clarke indeed. Very good, very good. And yet, Philip, I think Philip Menzies says Vinculus is not the charlatan that Norrell and everyone thinks he is. No, he's a different kind of charlatan. I mean, he is a charlatan, right? I mean, he does stand on the street corner and fake stuff to trick people out of money. I mean, that's by definition a charlatan, right? So he is, but I think that you are exactly sort of technically correct, Philip, in saying that he's not the charlatan that Norrell thinks he is, right? And so I absolutely agree. Karita says he's a scoundrel with a bonus of actual talent. Absolutely. Interesting. Kate Neville said when she first read it, she thought that the implication he was making is that he had destroyed the book after he heard the prophecy. It's possible. It's possible. Very good. Tom, I also agree that Vinculus does have rather a rascally look. I was thinking just the same thing. Good. Patrick says that he's a charlatan, but he seems to be a charlatan primarily in order to conceal his talent. I think so. That there is a sense in which he wants to be dismissed, perhaps. Though, Vinculus's motivations, it's worth keeping an eye on, I think, because I'm not sure I really understand them. But let's go ahead and look at the cards. Okay. The fifth card was the Valet de Coupe, the Page of Cups. One naturally thinks of a page as being a youthful person, but the picture showed a mature man with a bowed head. His hair was shaggy and his beard was thick. In his left hand he carried a heavy cup, yet it could not be that which gave such an odd, strained expression to his countenance, not unless it were the heaviest cup in the world. No, it must be some other burden, not immediately apparent. Owing to the materials which Childermass had been compelled to use to construct his cards, this picture had a most peculiar look. It had been drawn upon the back of a letter, and the writing showed through the paper. The man's clothes were a mass of scribble, and even his face and hands bore parts of the letters. Vinculus laughed when he saw it, as though he recognized it. He gave the card 3 taps in friendly greeting. Perhaps it was this that made Childermass less certain than he had been before. "You have a message to deliver to someone," he said in an uncertain tone. Vinculus nodded. "And will the next card show me this person?" he asked. "Yes." "Ah!" exclaimed Vinculus, and turned over the 6th card himself. All right, one more. The 6th card, was just finishing it. The 6th card was the Cavalier de Bâton, the Knight of Wands. A man in a broad-brimmed hat sat upon a horse of a pale colour. The countryside through which he rode was indicated by a few rocks and tufts of grass at his horse's hoofs. His clothes were well made and expensive-looking, but for some inexplicable reason he was carrying a heavy club. Even to call it a club was to make it sound grander than it was. It was scarcely more than a thick branch torn from a tree or hedge. There were still twigs and leaves protruding from it. Okay. There's a lot from the cards, and there is one more from the cards that I do want to talk about, that I do want to come to later on. I love the whole card sequence. But let's start with the second one here. Who's this? Who's this, and how do we know? How does this card work? This illustration, how are we supposed to be interpreting this interpretation? Who's Vinculus's message for? Who is this person, the Knight of Wands? Yeah, David Baxter, I agree with you. It starts rather ominously, right? Sorry, I'm on the wrong page here. Okay, right. He sat upon a horse of a pale color, right? And it's like, and the name of him that sat upon him was Death, right? Tom Hillman was thinking the same thing. It's a little ominous, agreed, right? Yeah, it's but yeah, it's strange. It's clearly Jonathan Strange, right? How do we know? How do we know this is Jonathan Strange? Unquestionably, unequivocally, Jonathan Strange. How do we know? The twigs and leaves, the strange club. Rachel, exactly. The description of the image on Childermass's card is exactly the same. It's not just that this sort of symbolically represents Jonathan Strange in some kind of way, though, of course, we can't rule out that there is, in fact, some symbolism involved here as well. It's a literal depiction. It's the next chapter? A couple of chapters, anyway, very soon after this, right, we meet Jonathan Strange for the first time. And he meets Vinculus, right? And Vinculus delivers a message to him. And what does he look like? Exactly like this. He's riding on horseback in expensive clothes. Are we told about his hat? I'm not sure we're told about his hat. But anyway, we're told that he's riding a horse. We're told that he's dressed nicely. And he has a club exactly like that. Because remember when he passes the villagers who've got their like weapons and pitchforks and things, and it looks like they've like cornered somebody under the hedge, and then he imagines his girlfriend, or his wishes she were his girlfriend, asking him if he had stopped to help the poor man who was trapped under the hedge, and him saying no, and he couldn't bear to do that, so he's going to go back, and he asks Jeremy Johns, his manservant now, the one who sort of killed his father, though, one can hardly blame Jeremy Johns exactly for that. But anyhow, he asks Jeremy if he's got any pistols or anything, and he doesn't have, so he cuts them clubs, and he goes back with a club fresh cut from a bush, and it's still got twigs and leaves growing off of it, and goes back, right? So what we learn, in a sense, about these cards is, again, this is not abstract. Right? Again, I'm not saying there isn't some, the idea that he's carrying a club and that it's all green and leaves are coming from it. I'm not saying that we could not also do some symbolic interpretation of that, right? And see that as a kind of a symbol for where Strange is in his magical career. But that's not the point, right? The point is the immediate relevance of it. The card is being revealed in order to identify the person to whom Vinculus is supposed to deliver a message, right? And what we get is like a photo of the person to whom he's going to deliver a message, who's going to be dressed exactly like that, holding a club exactly like that, when Vinculus meets him, right? So that, again, to me, this establishes a really interesting pattern for interpreting these cards, right? That, again, this is not obscure, this is not, sort of off the wall, it's not heavily symbolic. It's very simple, right? Notice the correlation. Notice the correlation in Childermass's cards. There seems to me a pretty clear correlation between between wands and magicians. The magicians all seem to be associated with wands, which I suppose doesn't seem all that peculiar. Anyway, okay, so let's go back to the earlier description, the description of the Page of Cups, which both Vinculus and Childermass seem to identify with Vinculus himself, right? Vinculus laughs as if he recognizes it and gives it 3 taps in friendly greeting. He's like, "Hey, look, it's me." And Childermass looks at it and says, his interpretation of the card is, "You have a message to deliver to someone," right? He's uncertain about it, but that's his. So again, he sees this as being, sort of directly relevant to Vinculus there too. Okay, so what do we get from this description then? If the other one is Jonathan Strange in a simple pictorial way, what do we see here? He's a page, but he's not youthful. He's a mature man with a bowed head. His hair is shaggy and his beard was thick. He carries a heavy cup, and he has a strained expression to his countenance. He is carrying some not immediately apparent burden, which of course also connects right back to what Vinculus just said about himself, that the book that is in his keeping is the greatest glory and the greatest burden that has ever been laid upon anybody. Yes. I agree, Page is delightful, but I'll say no more. The writing shows through the paper, so that the juxtaposition of the writing and the man, especially in the context of him talking about being the keeper of this book, the idea that writing is sort of superimposed upon him in this way, now again, his interpretation, Childermass's interpretation, by using very vague pronouns, is that he has a message to deliver to someone. I think that it's probably the writing, like that is the superimposition of the writing upon the picture of the figure which represents Vinculus. That seems to be what Childermass is interpreting as, this is you have a message, right? You're carrying words, right? And you're supposed to be conveying these words to somebody. That seems to be how Childermass is interpreting this. And it seems, of course, a perfectly plausible explanation. But you notice how detailed this description is and how closely it seems to fit with Vinculus, not physically, not quite in the simple, straightforward again, like almost photographic way that the picture of Jonathan Strange connects to Jonathan Strange as he will look when Vinculus meets him in order to deliver his burden. But still a careful description which picks up very closely on those details that Vinculus has just said, especially the part about the burden. And I think the reference to the mere fact that he's a page, right? He's a servant. He is bearing the cup of another, right? And that's the role that he has sort of claimed, right? He's the servant of the Raven King. He's the messenger of the Raven King. That's the role that he has adopted, right? And so page seems to sort of fit him in that regard. James, it is interesting how Vinculus seems to be much more certain of the interpretation and meaning in this scene than Childermass. It is interesting. And you remember the sequence when Vinculus wants to try to tell Childermass's fortune, and he puts down these cards and he doesn't say anything. He says he can't make anything of it. Childermass says, "My life is there," right? But you can't see it, right? He mocks him for his inability to interpret the cards, though to Childermass himself, his life is plainly laid bare on the table right there. It kind of makes you wonder: is Vinculus just playing his own cards a little closer to the chest than Childermass is? Right? Can he in fact interpret them? Does he have some kind of idea, and just isn't mentioning it? I don't know. To me, one of the questions that I kind of emerge from this whole sequence with about Vinculus is exactly how clueless is he? Or you could say it the other way around, right? Exactly how clueful is he? Is he, in fact, a genius magician mastermind who is playing a long game with the other two magicians? That reading seemed to me eminently possible at the end of this passage with Childermass. Or is he not? Is he, in fact, as clueless as he sort of wants to appear? He says he's just a servant, right? And the Page of Cups suggests that he is, in fact, just a servant, that he doesn't have the answers and he doesn't really know what's going on. Maybe. Kate, that's a wonderful observation. Kate Neville points out that there are many servants in this story. Fairies can be servants. The whole question of fairy servants. Strange and Norrell claim to be servants of the Empire, right? Servants of Britain. There's, of course, Stephen Black and Childermass and Jeremy Johns. Kate, I would go so far as to say that's a theme. Now, of course, you might say, well, look, this is 19th century English society. Of course, there are lots of servants. Why would that be sort of a peculiar theme? But I think that Kate's absolutely right. There's a lot of emphasis placed on the question of servitude and who's going to serve and who's going to be master. Remember, that was the issue with Mr. Norrell and the gentleman with the thistledown hair when they had their confrontation, which we looked at last time, where this fairy is coming to him and saying, "Hey, I'm going to sign up to be your fairy servant." And Norrell says, "Heck no, because then basically I'm going to be serving you. My magic will be serving you, and you're going to be the one who is going to be sort of getting all, you're going to bind England in servitude to a degenerate race," which he says rather rudely, perhaps unwisely. But again, so that whole question of servitude and who's going to serve whom, and then of course Stephen Black, almost by himself, Stephen Black, as not only a servant but as a Negro servant, certainly puts that whole question pretty firmly on the table. Kate, I think that's definitely an interesting motif to sort of be looking at all the way through, and of course, as with so many things, sort of hovering above that theme all the way through is the Raven King, right? The nameless slave. Okay, yeah, good. Very good. Brian Yoder, what a great question. Brian says, what is the magic of the cards? Why do they work? No idea, Brian. The faintest idea. In fact, it's so peculiar in this whole passage. I mean, like with those two, right? It's not just here is this symbolic depiction. I mean, the Knight of Wands that he puts down, which is Jonathan Strange. So, like, unbeknownst to himself, Childermass has been using, like, a portrait of Jonathan Strange, essentially. As his, he copied these the pictures off of this other deck, from the sailor who died and had to leave. So he copied these off another deck. He didn't make these up, right? He's certainly not improvising them for the occasion. But it turns out that when the cards are read on this occasion, that the image on the card is not just sort of symbolically apposite to the situation and can be interpreted in such a way, following the conventions of tarot interpretation, such that something can be revealed about the question being. It's not like that at all, right? I mean, that's Jonathan Strange on the picture, right? And that other one, though more abstract, not quite as literally, not quite as photographic as the Jonathan Strange one, the other one is Vinculus. So apparently, again, who knew, right, that he's been using, that Vinculus has been his Page of Cups all the way through. There does seem to be magic at work. Kristen, you're right. Some of them he did from memory. So is magic operative right now, or was magic operative at the time that he drew the cards? But John, you're right. It's changeable, right? And we're gonna come back to that. We're gonna come back. I do want to come back and look at that passage, but I want to look at it in the context of some of the things. I'm jumping around a little bit more tonight. Let's stick for a minute now on Jonathan Strange, and let's learn a little bit more about magic. But first, let's get introduced to an excellent Sharon. What a wonderful question. Thanks for pointing this out. She says, how does this compare to English magic? Exactly. Here seems to be our first example, right? This is not English magic. Those were not English cards. He didn't copy them from an Englishman, right? It would appear, Childermass's cards would appear to be the first genuinely non-English magic we have seen all the way through. But it's kind of ironic, given that the Raven King seems to be all over it, right? But anyway, we'll come back to the Raven King bit. Instead, let's talk about Jonathan Strange, the guy, and I want to go backwards again a little bit to how we first get introduced to him, because I find the story of Lawrence Strange. No, it's not that I find the story of Lawrence Strange peculiar. I find the way that Susanna Clarke chooses to introduce us to Jonathan Strange peculiar. Okay, maybe we needed to know that Lawrence Strange was a horrible person. Maybe we needed to know that. Maybe that helps us to understand Jonathan Strange's character in some way. There are certainly some very pleasant contrasts between Jonathan and his father, not the least of which, of course, is demonstrated in the way that they treat, in the relationship with Jeremy Johns, right? Jeremy Johns becomes like the living symbol of the difference between father and son in some sense and in some circumstances. But it is the way we're introduced to it is odd, frightfully odd, right? The Heartbreak Farm business, right? The path that began opposite Blackstock's alehouse and wound up the hill was fearfully overgrown. Indeed, it scarcely deserved the name of path, for young saplings grew in the middle of it, which the strong wind took and turned into rods to lash the new manservant as he struggled past. Just the wind, right? Just the wind just happened to blow those into like rods that you would use to beat somebody with and beat him as he walked by. It just kind of happens sometimes, it happens sometimes. Haven't you ever been walking down a path where there are saplings and the wind is blowing so hard that it just whips the saplings around and beats you like you're being beaten with rods? It's never happened to me, but I thought that maybe it might have happened to you. Anyway, by the time he had traveled half a mile, he felt as if he had fought several strong men one after another. And being a hot-headed sort of person who was always getting into quarrels in public places, it was a sensation perfectly familiar to him. I love that very understated sense of humor that Clarke has. I love her parentheses. He cursed Wyvern for a negligent idle fellow who could not even keep his hedges in order. It was only after an hour or so that he reached a place which might have been a field once, but which was now a wilderness of briars and brambles, and he began to regret that he had not brought an axe with him. He left the horse tied to a tree and tried to push his way through. The thorns were large, sharp, and plentiful. Several times he found himself pinned into the briar bushes in so many places, and in such an elaborate fashion, an arm up here, a leg twisted behind him, that he began to despair of ever getting out again. It seemed odd that anyone could live behind such a high hedge of thorns, and he began to think that it would be no great surprise to discover that Mr. Wyvern had been asleep for 100 years or so. Well, I shall not mind that so much, he thought, as long as I am not expected to kiss him. What's going on? What on earth is going on here? How do we as readers receive this whole chapter? We interrupt the story of Mr. Norrell and his re-establishment of English magic to tell you the apparently irrelevant story of Lawrence Strange and the highly unorthodox way in which he persecutes the help, right? If not for the fact that that the man's last name is Strange, and that Jonathan Strange, though he has never been introduced, has been alluded to throughout the book. In fact, he's quoted, you'll remember, in paragraph 2 of chapter 1 of the book, and we get the citation to the book that Jonathan Strange wrote on page 1 of chapter 1. So again, it's if not for that, we wouldn't have the faintest idea of who this guy is, right? What's going on here, though? Now, when I say what's going on here, of course, I don't mean like literally in the plot. I mean, I follow the story, right? We've got the remarkably, unusually sadistic Lawrence Strange, who appears to really enjoy inflicting suffering on people and has found this unexpected and highly creative way to punish Jeremy Johns for yelling at him. More. What's the atmosphere that is established here? Yeah, absolutely. John Moline says Heartbreak Farm sounds reminiscent of a fairy location. Sounds very reminiscent. In fact, you remember the other fairy location is Lost Hope, right? Heartbreak Farm sounds a lot like Lost Hope. Maybe it's on the lands of Lost Hope, and sort of pays rent to Lost Hope. That would seem sort of appropriate. In case we didn't catch it, by the end of the paragraph, we have the explicit... Jeremy Johns himself is thinking he must be in a fairy tale by the end of this, right? The description of him going down this path... He's told by his master that there's a path that he's supposed to follow, and he can see that there's a path, but he ends up forcing his way through. It's like he feels like he is entering some kind of nightmarish, John, I'll give you that. Some kind of nightmarish other world. Tom Hillman says it reminds him of Jonathan Harker's approach to Castle Dracula. That was a great deal more civilized, of course, Jonathan Harker's approach. But it's but I hear you. Yeah, it has some of those kinds of elements, and Sharon, I agree. Any place behind a high hedge of thorns is suspect. Like that. Remember, you'll notice, Sharon, that's when Jeremy Johns himself starts to suspect, right? Anyone who lives behind this high of a hedge of thorns, he wouldn't be surprised to find Mr. Wyvern had been asleep for 100 years or so, right? And of course, it doesn't help that his name is Wyvern, right? Which is related to the dragon. So it's like you're going through to is this actually a dragon's lair that he's going to? That begins to seem almost plausible at this point. That sort of the final. Flourish at the end of Lawrence Strange's revenge here is going to be the fact that Mr. Wyvern is actually a dragon who will then eat Jeremy Johns. Hooray! Happy ending, right? That seems to be sort of where it's going. Claudia, yes, the high hedge of thorns is very Sleeping Beauty. Absolutely. Kristen says he probably started praying to St. George, the patron saint of England, the dragon slayer. Yes, indeed. Maybe he sounds like it would be quite a good idea. Sarah Lagarde points out the Jeremy story sounds like scenes from a dozen different Grimm's fairy tales. Absolutely. And it does. And Sarah Lagarde absolutely also then points out the way that Lawrence Strange is built up as the giant that the hitherto unnamed servant slew. Absolutely. That's exactly how it works, right? Jeremy Johns becomes Jack the Giant Killer by the end of this story, right? With Lawrence Strange as the giant. Okay. And now, okay. Is there actually... So, my question is... Okay, no. It's still the same question. What is going on? Where are we? Is there actual magic going on? Is there actual fairy magic going on? I mean, in another book, we might be like, ooh, that's like a fun metaphor, right? It's like fairy. It's like the... But, I mean, come on, right? I mean, he could be going into the other world. Lawrence Strange could be a fairy, but he certainly seems malicious enough for one. I mean, Lawrence Strange and the gentleman with the thistledown hair would probably get along. I mean, I don't know if Lawrence Strange is hot enough. Probably not. I don't think he's sufficiently handsome. But yeah, Kristen Thompson is wondering if Jeremy Johns was a seventh son. Maybe, yeah, or maybe he was a widow's son. Right? Yeah, I bet his mom's a widow. Yeah. No, absolutely. It's now. I suspect both Carita and Brian Yoder are sort of speculating, always holding out the possibility that it's not actually magical. And of course, as Brian points out, all that's waiting for him on the other side is a perfectly mundane yeoman who tells him that the Mr. Wyvern in question died. That's what's a perfectly natural explanation for why it's overgrown, because the man who lived here is dead and his land has been lying, idle for several years. That's all. It's just that. Yeah. So what's the effect? We come back to the larger question. Why? Why do we get introduced to Jonathan Strange this way? Jonathan Strange is differentiated from his cruel father, right? He is not Lawrence Strange. And we see him eager to differentiate himself from his father in the eyes of his future wife, right? He's not going to treat people like his dad. He's going to show her how I'm blanking. What's her name? Before Arabella's maiden name, Woodhope? Is that it? Woodhope? Yeah, Woodhope. Okay, thank you. Woodhope. Miss Woodhope. Sorry. I never actually thought about her name before. Miss Woodhope, right? Like she would hope. Under some circumstances. That's awesome, actually. Just might be my favorite. All of a sudden, that has leapt forward to be perhaps my favorite name in the entire book. But anyway, okay, so he's not his dad, right? He's not a horrible monster like his dad. And yet there's this atmosphere of fairy and of ominous, nasty nightmare fairy, not gentle, sweet fairy, right? But there is this element of fairy all the way through. Sharon, that's a great way to say it. As Sharon says, he is born and raised in a climate of otherness. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, but notice, again, Clarke is so patient and so subtle. She doesn't make anything from that, right? Not only does she not make any overt claim that there is fairy magic actually associated, actually truly in sober reality, fairy magic associated with his family. She never says that at all, right? This is just a mere impression that Jeremy Johns have, who, remember, may already be developing a fever by this time, right? So even the impression that the saplings are beating him as he goes by, he's probably just being delusional, right? Or perhaps even remembering this. And anyway, okay, so not only does she not say that there's actual fairy magic, she doesn't even come back to this, right? We're going to drop this entirely. Other than those references, the first time we meet Jonathan when he's thinking about Miss Woodhope and how he's going to differentiate himself from his father, do we ever even get a reference to Lawrence Strange again? I mean, he never comes up. We're never even going to talk about this again. But we, as readers, have been supplied with this. This is the context in which we're given Jonathan Strange, and given how he, from the beginning, is a staunch defender of fairy magic and the fairy element of English magic. That seems kind of interesting. So here's Jonathan's decision to become a magician. "A magician?" said Henry, quite astonished as his future brother-in-law. "Why should you want to do that?" Strange paused. He did not wish to tell his real reason, which was to impress Arabella with his determination to do something sober and scholarly, and so he fell back upon the only other explanation he could think of. "I met a man under a hedge at Monk Gretton who told me that I was a magician." Well, Jonathan, I think you've succeeded in finding a reason which is different from your desire to impress Arabella, as she was doubtless under a hedge. She was doubtless less impressed by the fact that you did this because a man under a hedge told you that you should. John, sober and scholarly is interesting, isn't it? That's his association, right? It isn't associated with the Raven King or fairies explicitly, right? He seems to be putting it anyway into the context of theoretical magicians, right? Those scholarly gentlemen who study magic. It's not that he doesn't intend to be a practical magician, but that's plainly the sort of the category that he seems to put it into, which is then immediately belied by the fact that he's like, it was prophesied by a magician or somebody, some raggedy man who was sleeping under a hedge. Mr. Redmond laughed, approving the joke. "Excellent," he said. "Did you indeed?" said Mrs. Redmond. "I do not understand," said Henry Woodhope. "You do not believe me, I suppose?" said Strange to Arabella. "Oh, on the contrary, Mr. Strange," said Arabella with an amused smile. "It is all of a piece with your usual way of doing things. It is quite as strong a foundation for a career as I should expect from you." Oh, the burn! Henry said, "But if you are going to take up a profession, and I cannot see why you should want one at all, now that you have come into your property, surely you can choose something better than magic. It has no practical application." Henry, plainly thinking of theoretical magicians, right? "Oh, but I think you are wrong," said Mr. Redmond. "There is that gentleman in London who confounds the French by sending them illusions. I forget his name. What is it he calls his theory? Modern magic?" "But how is that different from the old-fashioned sort?" wondered Mrs. Redmond. "And which will you do, Mr. Strange?" What a wonderful set of questions! How is it different from the old-fashioned sort of magic? And which will you do, Mr. Strange? Right? What marvelous questions. Okay, so notice another thing that we have learned here, right? Here, still on page 257, we're still piecing together what English magic is. And here we have a plain piece of evidence that this theory of this thing that Mr. Norrell is doing, which he is calling modern magic, is described by Mr. Redmond as a theory, right? It's some newfangled idea, not... remember, Mr. Norrell has been talking all along like he is going to bring English magic back, right? That's not how they understand it, right? He's not doing the old-fashioned sort of magic. He's doing this other thing, modern magic, right? It's different. But how is it different? Mrs. Redmond doesn't know. And which one is Strange going to do? Indeed. Yeah, John Moline thinks that Mr. Norrell would not be best pleased that they couldn't remember his name. And I suspect you are correct about that. So let's look at some let's look at some very old-fashioned magic here. Because we immediately as we are getting introduced to Strange, we are learning about some more old-fashioned magic. Here's the Shadow House. One of his boldest achievements, that is that magician who didn't really do magic, Absalom, was to persuade the King of Denmark to pay a great handful of diamonds for a spell which Absalom claimed would turn the flesh of the King of Sweden into water. Naturally, the spell did nothing of the sort, but with the money he got for half these jewels, Absalom built the Shadow House. He furnished it with Turkey carpets and Venetian mirrors and glass and 100 other beautiful things. Glass, of course, being very precious at this time, which is the very early 17th century. Turkey carpets, Venetian mirrors, and glass, right? All the modern amenities, and 100 other beautiful things. And when the house was completed, a curious thing happened, or may have happened, or did not happen at all. Some scholars believe, and others do not, that the magic Absalom had pretended to do for his clients began to appear of its own accord in the house. On a moonlit night in 1610, 2 maids looked out of a window on an upper floor and saw 20 or 30 beautiful ladies and handsome gentlemen dancing in a circle on the lawn. In February 1666, Valentine Greatrakes, an Irishman, of course, held a conversation in Hebrew with the prophets Moses and Aaron in a little passageway near the great linen press. In 1667, Mrs. Penelope Chelmorton, a visitor to the house, looked in a mirror and saw a little girl of 3 or 4 years old looking out. As she watched, she saw the child grow up and grow older, and she recognized herself. Mrs. Chelmorton's reflection continued to age until there was naught but a dead, dry corpse in the mirror. The reputation of the Shadow House is based upon these and 100 other such tales. Okay. Old-fashioned magic, right? First, what do we see described here? The first point, and I think, Emily, you're very right to point out that there's an air of mystery and disagreement regarding the facts of the story, right? The context of the whole thing we're told, many stories grew up. It's uncertain how many of them were true and to what extent we can believe any of them, right? That's part of what we see. And yet, it seems likely that some of them were true, right? Let's assume they're true for now, for argument's sake. Let's assume these are examples of old-fashioned English magic. At the very least, even if they're not true examples of old English magic, they will at least tell us what kinds of stories, what kind of magical acts are associated with the minds of storytellers with Old English magic. And that will still get us somewhere, right? And you're right, John, that this is taking place after the end of English magic. The Raven King is gone from England at this time. He's been gone now for some time. Through the 17th century, the golden age of magic in England is over. So the fact that English magic is lingering in the house, if indeed English magic is lingering in the house, is for that reason a pretty big deal, right? So what kind of magic do we get? What do we see? What kind of patterns can we see in this magic? What do you notice? Yeah, McNeil says encounters. Yes, magic mirrors and fairy circles, John Moline points out. Yes. It's unpredictable and uncontrolled, James, absolutely. It's not under anybody's control. It's just happening here. Encounters, going back, Mick, to what you were saying, these two maids look out and they see 20 or 30 beautiful ladies and handsome gentlemen dancing in a circle. So we do see a fairy ring there, John, as you've been pointing out. And the beautiful ladies and handsome gentlemen would presumably be fairies. That seems like a fairly safe guess. There's that encounter with Moses and Aaron. The Valentine Great Rakes, which is a pretty good name. Just make sure you know the vocabulary. You know what a rake is, right? A rake is it's not slang exactly, but it's a colloquial English term for a gentleman of low moral character, a guy who's always partying out on the town and who's very likely to try to take advantage of young ladies and engage in such scandalous pastimes as playing cards for money and things like that. That's a rake. So that this guy's last name is Great Rakes is pretty decisive, and then it's an inside joke that he's an Irishman. That is, it's sort of the kind of insult that a 19th century person would make at the expense of an Irishman, basically. It's all very funny. But yeah, Kate Neville says one wonders what Moses and Aaron would have to say to an Irish rake. Well, exactly. The point seems to be the contrast there, right? This is not, a great and learned divine came to the home and saw a vision of Moses and Aaron and conversed with them in Hebrew. Then you might think it was a divine vision, right? No. It's the contrast. The Irishman Valentine Great Rakes not only encounters Moses and Aaron, whom we will perhaps not expect to choose him to speak to, but he also holds the conversation in Hebrew, which doubtless he himself had not studied. So it's an encounter. But it's comical. It's a comically improbable encounter as well. I kind of wonder, Brian, why the King of Denmark wasn't more upset that the King of Sweden's flesh didn't turn into water, right? I mean, that's a pretty decisive effect that Absalom claimed to be able to perform and failed to perform it. You'd think there might have been some repercussions there. Anyway, okay. Overall point here is we see the way in which this house seems to be a place where things come into contact, right? Jonathan Strange has come here, we learn, in order to try to speak with a dead magician, in fact, Absalom's daughter, who lived here. Why? Because he has no books, right? He's trying to learn magic. So how does Jonathan Strange go about learning magic? By going to this place where sort of the boundaries between England and Faerie seem rather thin, right? He is appealing, in a sense, to this sort of inchoate tradition of English magic. This English magic which, for whatever reason, was welling up here in this spot, right? But it's not quite. It's not quite whatever happens, right? That is, it's not quite for whatever reason. There might in fact be a reason why magic was welling up here so much, and this comes in the footnote to this passage. Some scholars, Jonathan Strange among them, have argued that Maria Absalom knew exactly what she was about when she permitted her house to go to rack and ruin. It is their contention that Miss Absalom did what she did in accordance with the commonly held belief that all ruined buildings belong to the Raven King. This presumably would account for the fact that the magic at the Shadow House appeared to grow stronger after the house fell into ruin. All of man's works, all his cities, all his empires, all his monuments will one day crumble to dust. Even the houses of my own dear readers must, though it be for just one day, 1 hour, be ruined, and become houses where the stones are mortared with moonlight, windowed with starlight, and furnished with the dusty wind. It is said that in that day, in that hour, our houses become the possessions of the Raven King. Though we bewail the end of English magic, and say it is long gone from us, and inquire of each other how it was possible that we came to lose something so precious, let us not forget that it also waits for us at England's end, and one day we will no more be able to escape the Raven King than in this present age we can bring him back. Quotation from The History and Practice of English Magic by Jonathan Strange, published John Murray, London, 1816. Okay. Notice the fun with time that Susanna Clarke is having here, right? She's giving part of this sort of an early frame for Jonathan Strange, and she's explaining it by giving us a quotation from Jonathan Strange in the future, right? So we get the voice of Jonathan Strange from the future commenting back upon what is going on here at Jonathan Strange's beginning. Janice, you're absolutely correct. According to Jonathan Strange here, the Raven King is the once and future Magician King of England. Yeah, exactly. That Arthurian role is very much being played by the Raven King here. Absolutely. Brian Yoder says, I remember that way back in Chapter 1 when we met John Segundus, I was wondering whether he was not going to become Jonathan Strange, as in a second persona of his, partly because of the events of the beginning and also because of the closeness of the names. And the fact, I would add, Brian, that Strange seems like it could so easily be a pseudonym, right? I was thinking the same thing, Brian. That was my suspicion at the very beginning when reading Chapter 1 and 2 also. So anyway, okay. So we see Jonathan Strange from his beginning. Again, this first orientation that we're getting to Jonathan Strange. Which kind of magician is he going to be? The old kind or the new kind? We see him reaching back into the past. He's got to, right? He has no books he can read. So he has to do all that he can, and all he can do is reach back into the past through this tradition of English magic, through the fairy magic, which seems to be at work here in the Shadow House, and back through that to, ultimately, to the Raven King himself, to whom all ruins belong, and whose presence would seem to be strong here. Here's Strange meeting Mr. Norrell, then. As to what I shall write, that is in the review, he's gonna write an article for the Gentleman's Magazine. As to what I shall write, continued Strange, I do not quite know yet, but it will most likely be a refutation of Portishead's article in the Modern Magician. Did you see it, sir? It put me in a rage for a week. He sought to prove that modern magicians have no business dealing with fairies. It is one thing to admit that we have lost the power to raise such spirits. It is quite another to renounce all intention of ever employing them. I have no patience with any such squeamishness. But what is most extraordinary is that I have yet to see any criticism of Portishead's article anywhere. Now that we have something approaching a magical community, I think we would be very wrong to let such thick-headed nonsense pass unreproved. Strange, apparently thinking that he had talked enough, waited for one of the other gentlemen to reply. After a moment or two of silence, Mr. Lascelles remarked that Lord Portishead had written the article at Mr. Norrell's express wish, and with Mr. Norrell's aid and approval. The distance, of course, between Strange and Norrell and their assumptions about magic, their outlook on magic, is very, very plain, very, very forceful in the beginning. This is indeed a very awkward way to start a relationship, Brian. Absolutely. What a fascinating observation, Nancy. That's great. She says, if Norrell seems old because of his miserliness, remember Mrs. What's her name? Darn it, I've forgotten her name. You know, the P, the housekeeper of Mr. Secundus. What was her name? Darn it, I've forgotten her name. Anyway, somebody remind me of the name of the perspicacious lady who said the thing about the miser. Anyway, remember she said she doesn't know if Mr. Norrell is actually old, but she imagines him old, right? Because he's so miserly. Nancy says, if Norrell seems old because of his miserliness, then Strange seems young because of his naivete. Mrs. Pleasance. Thank you, Brian. Yes, Mrs. Pleasance. Yes, it doesn't really matter how old Strange actually is. He seems young. I agree. That's a fine idea there, Nancy. Yeah, okay, so again, very, very clearly showing us the great distance, the great difference in how they approach things. But now, let's put a little pressure on this here. Wherein exactly does the difference lie between the two of them? What is the distinction? What's the subject? Again, it's easy enough to sort of see how he's offended Mr. Norrell and focus on that. It's easy to see that the two of them have different ideas about magic without thinking any more about that, but we can think some more about that, right? What exactly is the issue at stake here? It's not even exactly about English magic. It kind of is, but it's not really about the nature of magic. Yeah, I mean, there are some other issues. I mean, I agree, Nancy, that scholarly discourse is, in a sense, this subject, right? You know, that of all of the naive things Strange says here, not the least naive of his statements is his statement, but what is most extraordinary is I have yet to see any criticism of Portishead's article anywhere. I can't think for the life of me why nobody has spoken out against this, right? Because he has no idea that there is not, in fact, an open scholarly community of magicians, but rather that, in fact, Mr. Norrell is controlling everything behind the scenes. So yes, in a sense, scholarly discourse is a subject, a theme here. But explicitly, Kristen, I agree, the use of fairies, right? The question of how wise is it? Is it or is it not a good idea for a magician to deal with fairies? Remember, Strange says there's no sense denying that we no longer have the power to do this, right? So it would be silly, one could extend his argument perhaps and say it would be silly to argue that English magic is essentially tied to fairy magic, that there can be no English magic without fairies, because they don't know how to summon fairies and yet they can still do magic. So clearly you can't really argue that. He wouldn't go so far as that. The issue is not, is English magic connected with fairies? Again, it's not that that's not an issue that's going to come up, and they're going to talk about this later, but that's not the topic here. The topic here, what Portishead's article says, is he sought to prove that modern magicians have no business dealing with fairies. It's not about whether or not they can. It's not about whether or not they did. It's about whether or not they should, right? And his argument that they should not, right? That's Portishead's argument, which drives Strange into a rage for a week. So it's about their willingness to do this thing, which Strange dismisses as squeamishness, right? That's how he characterizes this attitude, which is remarkable. Kevin Ulrich makes a great comment. Kevin says, Norrell is afraid and wants to control everything. Strange is excited at the new world he is discovering and excited to explore the possibilities. Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it's obvious from their relationship with the war that Strange has a great deal more personal courage than Norrell does. And so the idea that Strange would be less intimidated by or sort of scared of, worried about dealing with fairies is not surprising, right? But I think there's more to it. There's more to it than that. It's not just about courage. Like, yeah, I agree it's dangerous, but I don't care. I'm willing to take the chance, right? That's not what he's saying. He seems appalled by the idea it's mere squeamishness to say you shouldn't do it. He's not saying, yeah, it's dangerous, but I'll do it anyway. Chris Swank says that Norrell is like Baggins and Strange is like Took. The parallel works in some ways. Let's move forward a little bit in this same discussion, however, when Mr. Strange has laid another egg in the conversation here and talked about, mentioned the Raven King. Mr. Norrell nodded. It is one of my ambitions to make that man as completely forgotten as he deserves, he said. But surely, sir, without the Raven King there would be no magic and no magicians? That is the common opinion, certainly. But even if it were true, which I am very far from allowing, he has long since forfeited any entitlement to our esteem. What were his first actions upon coming into England? To make war upon England's lawful king and rob him of half his kingdom. And shall you and I, Mr. Strange, let it be known that we have chosen such a man as our model? That we account him the first among us? Will that make our profession respected? Will that persuade the king's ministers to put their trust in us? I do not think so. No, Mr. Strange, if we cannot make his name forgotten, then it is our duty, yours and mine, to broadcast our hatred of him, to let it be known everywhere our great abhorrence of his corrupt nature and evil deeds. Okay. So what's Mr. Norrell's argument exactly? What does this boil down to? What's he focused on? What's his point? Because, see, I know that there are times I caught myself reading this book for the first time, thinking, hearing Norrell talk about the Raven King. I found myself interpreting that as, well, okay, maybe Mr. Norrell really just means this for the best. That is to say, he's worried that other English magicians they're going to focus too much on the Raven King, and the Raven King is dangerous, right? And magicians, in trying to invoke the Raven King or to study the Raven King, they don't really know what they're getting themselves into. So he's trying to protect other English magicians who don't understand how dangerous this all is, right? That seems kind of reasonable, except for one point. You see, of course, the flaw in my own reasoning there. That assumes Mr. Norrell is interested in anybody else practicing magic at all, right? He's not trying to protect other English magicians from doing Raven King magic. He is trying to prevent any other English people from performing magic at all, right? So why should he care? But anyway, and that's certainly not his emphasis here, right? Yeah, Chris, it's all about upholding the monarchy. Absolutely, Kevin. Kevin Ulrich says allegiance to the Raven King is treachery against England. Absolutely, that's how he characterizes it here, right? It's sort of a political thing, but it's not just about politics. It's not. This is not. So I mean, because is Mr. Norrell saying, like, well, naturally I have a great and spontaneous patriotism to our beloved land, and I just can't bear the idea of the Raven King who took away half of the kingdom of the the anointed King of England? That's not how he's talking, right? How's he talking? He sounds that way at first. What were his first actions upon coming to England? To make war upon England's lawful king and rob him of half his kingdom. If he had gone on from there to say, and shall you and I, Mr. Strange, as loyal English subjects, bear to think of such a horrible breach upon our fine nation, right? That's not where he goes at all, right? And shall you and I, Mr. Strange, let it be known that we have chosen such a man as our model, right? It's not about spontaneous patriotism. It's about perception, right? It's about, John, I agree with you. It's about patronage, right? Yeah, exactly, Nick. It's about his reputation. Absolutely. Will that make our profession respected? That's his goal. Remember, we saw that from the beginning. Remember the house that he bought, right? I want to make sure everybody knows that being a magician is a more respectable profession than at least as respectable as a lawyer, and a good deal more than a physician, right? Donna, he is trying to establish himself as the first magician going forward. But, of course, what that's wrapped up in is defining what a magician is, right? A magician is certainly not some crazy-eyed guy from Fairy who's going to come in and take half the kingdom away. No. Do not have that association with magicians, right? No. Magicians are predictable Baggins-like professional, learned gentlemen who are loyal to the king, right? That's that. It's all about respect. We must broadcast our hatred of the Raven King. Let it be known everywhere our great abhorrence of his corrupt nature and evil deeds. Notice again, even here he's not talking about spontaneous abhorrence and spontaneous hatred. Like, given you and I obviously abhor him, we must make sure everybody knows that, right? Or, give warnings to all people. No, we must broadcast our hatred. Let it be known everywhere that we have great abhorrence. Yeah, exactly. Brian, I know I do have a hard time leaving the Hobbit comparison behind. Yeah, it's all Chris Swank's fault. It is not my fault. She brought it up. It is absolutely not my fault. Here, let's go back to Childermass's cards. Since we're now talking about the Raven King, in this context, I wanted to come back to this. Here's Childermass talking about the card. It's Mr. Norrell's fortune that's being told with the cards here, right? I do not seem to have copied this card very well. I never noticed before. The inking is badly done. The lines are thick and smudged, so that the Emperor's hair and robe appear almost black. And someone has left a dirty thumbprint over the eagle. The Emperor should be an older man than this. I've drawn a young man. Are you going to hazard an interpretation? No, said Vinculus, and indicated by a contemptuous thrust of his chin that Childermass should turn the next card. 4. L'Empereur. There was a short silence. That is not possible, said Childermass. There are not 2 emperors in this pack. I know there are not. If anything, the king was younger and fiercer than before. His hair and robes were black, and the crown upon his head had become a thin band of pale metal. There was no trace of the thumbprint upon the card, but the great bird in the corner was now decidedly black, and it had cast off its eagle-like aspects, and settled itself into a shape altogether more English. It had become a raven. Childermass turned over the 3rd card. 4. L'Empereur. And the 4th. 4. L'Empereur. And by the 5th, the number and name of the card had disappeared, but the picture remained the same, a young, dark-haired king at whose feet strutted a great black bird. Childermass turned over each and every card. He even examined the remainder of the pack, but in his anxiety to see, he fumbled, and the cards somehow fell everywhere. Black kings crowded about Childermass, spinning in the cold grey air. Upon each card was the same figure, with the same pale, unforgiving gaze. "There," said Vinculus softly. "That is what you may tell the magician of Hanover Square. That is his past and his present and his future." That is so awesome. I agree, Brian. That scene absolutely gave me chills when I read it for the first time. Heck, it just gave me chills again now, reading it for the third time. So, what's happening here? I say this and I don't know the answer to this question. John Mullane, that's exactly the question. Is this Vinculus's magic? Is this the Raven King's magic? We don't know. We don't know. Who is Vinculus? Is he in fact he's the page? Again, I guess the page of cups. Yeah. Interesting, yeah. Kate Neville was thinking about parallels between Jonathan Strange and Stephen Black. And notice, did you notice, Kate, the description of the crown? I was just noticing how the crown, as the picture changes and morphs more and more emphatically into the Raven King, how the crown shrinks down to become a crown exactly like the one that Stephen Black put on his head. Later on. Absolutely. Brian says it's interesting that Vinculus lays out the cards but has Childermass turn them. Yes, it is. You'll remember later on that Mr. Norrell dismisses all this as mere sleight of hand by Vinculus, right? That Childermass has been deceived by a con artist, right? Vinculus is a known con artist. This is what he does. And he laid out the cards, right? He's the one who, so he could easily have switched them. But Childermass's response to that is kind of hard to get around. Childermass says, how could he possibly have known that I was going to produce a deck of cards of this kind, right? In theory, had he known that, he could have pre-prepared a set of Emperor cards that all looked like the Raven King and swapped them. That's theoretically possible, but it is not possible that without magic he could possibly have known that Childermass... Even Mr. Norrell doesn't know that Childermass has a deck of these cards. And Brian, I agree. The cards do seem to change back, and we're not told that Vinculus picked them up. Now, Nancy, that's a wonderful question. So again, that John was asking, is this the Raven King's magic at work? Is this Vinculus's magic at work? Nancy suggests another theory, that perhaps Childermass's own magic has something to do with it. He does seem to have created a really good tarot deck. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the picture of Jonathan Strange, right? There has to be magic involved. Either there's magic right now transforming the cards, which, in light of the Raven King cards, is certainly possible, or else, but I don't think so. Not with the Jonathan Strange card, not with the Knight of Wands card, because when it turns it over, Childermass, who presumably is pretty familiar with this deck, right? He turns it over, he doesn't say, hey, that's not what the Knight of Cups looks like, right? So, whereas he does comment on this. So we do have reason to think that the picture of Jonathan Strange that is on the Knight of Cups, or Wands rather, that is on the Knight of Wands, is the thing that Childermass drew originally. So Nancy, it is possible then, right, that it was in fact his own magic, Childermass's own magic. Oh, interesting. Kristen says, another interesting thing, if the crown is indeed depicted as the same, the gentleman with a thistledown hair's statement about its not being a very good crown. Kristen, what he complains about is that he's ashamed of the fact that he created it by magic. The orb and the scepter are legit, right? Those are real. actual royal relics. The crown is just his own hat transformed by magic. So that's what the gentleman with the thistledown hair is saying. I doubt that he is sort of impugning the royalty of the Raven King necessarily. Anyway, I don't think we can, from within this scene alone, resolve the question of whose magic is at work here and what's going on. But of course, let's not forget, let's not get so caught up in the cards themselves and the sort of transformation of the cards that we miss the whole point of the cards, right? The fortune that Vinculus is telling, which is, this is Mr. Norrell's fortune, right? And Vinculus, he couldn't interpret Childermass's fortune, but he can interpret this one. Right? This, the Raven King, is Mr. Norrell's past, present, and future. So, howsoever Mr. Norrell would like to separate himself from the Raven King, Vinculus does not believe he's going to be able to do that. John the Raven King's gone. He's not been around for 300 years. But he's not dead. He's just gone. And you never know when he's going to come back. He's the Raven King, for crying out loud. The Raven King, it does seem like the Raven King is not really gone. More thoughts, Mr. Norrell, on the Raven King. I agree that the Raven King has everything to do with it, that is, the association between fairies and English magic, said Mr. Norrell. But not, I think, in the way you suppose. Consider, if you will, Mr. Strange, that all the time the Raven King ruled northern England, he also ruled a fairy kingdom. Consider, if you will, that no king has ever had two such diverse races under his sway. Consider, if you will, that he was as great a king as he was a magician, a fact which almost all historians are prone to overlook. I think there can be little doubt that he was as much preoccupied with the task of binding his two peoples together, a task which he accomplished, Mr. Strange, by deliberately exaggerating the role of fairies in magic. In this way, he increased his human subjects' esteem for fairies, he provided his fairy subjects with useful occupation, and made both peoples desire each other's company. Yes, said Strange thoughtfully, I see that. It seems to me, continued Mr. Norrell, that even the greatest of Orient magicians miscalculated the extent to which fairies are necessary to human magic. Look at Pale. He considered his fairy spirits so essential to the pursuit of his art that he wrote that his greatest treasures were the 3 or 4 fairy spirits living in his house. Yet my own example makes it plain that almost all respectable sorts of magic are perfectly achievable without any assistance from anyone. What have I ever done that has needed the help of a fairy? I mean, please, honestly. He ends with a rhetorical flourish, right? Nancy, you're absolutely right. Kate points out, by the way, that Norrell's opinions here are, in her opinion, beyond the pale. I agree. Nancy says it exactly just what I was thinking, Nancy. His whole argument sounds very, very sensible right up until the last 2 sentences, right? Yeah, it gets completely undermined in the ears of the reader by that last sentence. Brian, it sounds like you're suggesting that there's a kind of tautology, in a sense, in Mr. Norrell's thinking, that as he says, it makes my own example makes it plain that almost all respectable sorts of magic are perfectly achievable without the assistance from anyone, from any one fairy, much less 3 or 4. There does seem to be a kind of tautology there, right? Magic that does not involve fairies is respectable, and therefore he does all this respectable magic without assistance from anyone, from any fairy servant, right? So Neil, absolutely, his magic with Lady Pole is not respectable magic in almost any sense, in fact, right? However, I don't want to lose the larger argument that he's making here. Again, it's very decidedly undermined at the end there by the equivocation that he offers in the end. But his argument about the Raven King does make a certain amount of sense. Yeah, exactly, Sharon. That's just what I was going to say. Do we throw out all of this information based on those last two questions? I don't think that we do. I don't think that necessarily means that that Mr. Norrell is perfectly fair in his assessment here. But one of the things that I think it certainly does do, at the very least, Mr. Norrell has succeeded in reminding us that the Raven King spans the two kingdoms, right? The defining element of the Raven King's character is that he stands with one foot in England and one foot in Faerie, right? He is the ruler over the fairies as well as the ruler over the English. And Mr. Norrell is certainly right that needs to be remembered. But I don't think that necessarily means that the connection between English magic and fairies is therefore, by definition, merely a kind of political machination on the Raven King's part. That business seems to be a little bit different. Brian says Mr. Norrell is justifying himself. I wonder what his ring monologue would be like. I agree. But see, Brian, now you're just laying snares for me, right? You're like, oh, it worked for Chris Swank. Now I'll do it too. I'm onto you. I'm totally onto you. Okay. I was just looking. Yeah, we can go. Let's do two more. Okay, so we have a strong difference of opinion about fairies and English magic between Strange and Norrell. As we saw, the link between them is formed by the Raven King. Is that just a political move on his part, or is it in fact essential, as Jonathan says is the traditional belief, in which he himself seems to accept, that English magic is derivative of fairy, and that the Raven King brought it with him from fairy. Tom Hillman says, I think it's all based on Boethius. I will not be drawn. I will not. I defy you. Yeah, Sharon was just saying the same thing. You guys are awful. No. I will not be drawn. So let's look at fairy magic. In the spirit, in a sense, of resolving the debate, or let me say this in a different way. Strange and Norrell have different opinions about this. What external evidence do we get from the rest of the story to bring to this question? We get the discussion of these two learned gentlemen, of these two magicians. How do we know what's right and wrong? How do we know sort of where to stand here? None of these miracles did anything to raise poor Stephen's spirits, right? So this is all the fairy magic that's being done for Stephen Black's benefit, right? All of these miraculous blessings that are being sent to him. Remember the dog who carries the message, and the random guy who shows up to give Stephen money to pay him back for a bet that Stephen never made. None of these miracles did anything to raise poor Stephen's spirits. They served only to emphasize the eerie character of his present life. He knew that the overseer, the guy who gave him money, the dog, and the mayor, and the alderman were all acting against their natures. Overseers loved money. They did not give it away for no good reason. Dogs did not patiently pursue strange quests for weeks on end, and mayors and aldermen did not suddenly develop a lively interest in Negro servants they had never seen. Yet none of his friends seemed to think that there was anything remarkable about the course his life was taking. He was sick of the sight of gold and silver, and his little room at the top of the house in Harley Street was full of treasures he did not want. Okay. So, what do we learn about fairy magic here? I think this is one of the things I think is so fascinating about the way that the story of Lady Pole and Stephen Black is sort of woven in here, right? And it Tom, it was you that brought up Dracula earlier. This is the part that was reminding me of Dracula, actually. It's just like those scenes in the sort of second quarter of Dracula, after we get the first 4 chapters with Jonathan Harker in Transylvania, and then we come back to England so that we as readers have been oriented to Dracula and what he is and what he does, and we see him acting and we know how to interpret it, but the people around are still sort of ignorant. It reminded me of this, right? That we get people talking about fairy magic, and how, it's not in England anymore, and it's a shame, really. Well, Mr. Strange thinks it's a shame. Mr. Norrell does not. Notice that the one thing Strange is willing to concede, right? The thing that they agree on is that fairy magic is not really operative anymore, right? It doesn't really work. Well, of course, Mr. Norrell knows that's not exactly true, as he in fact summoned him. But anyway, point is, while this is going on, meanwhile, there's fairy magic all around them. And in fact, in the very homes, just as Dracula is busily present right there in the background of where people are sort of wondering what on earth is going on. Anyhow, as I said, it reminded me of those passages in Dracula very much. It's the dramatic irony, Tom. It's a very similar kind of breed, it seems to me, of dramatic irony. So, what do we learn here about fairy magic? What do we see about fairy magic? Karina says, we learn that it is not a delightful thing to be besties with a fairy. Disney is full of lies. Yes, Disney is full of lies about fairy. Stephen Black and Lady Pole would probably punch you in the face if you went on about fairy princesses and things. What do we learn about it? Well, look, Stephen is being blessed, right? He's being given gift after gift. The gentleman with the thistledown hair is the unwavering friend of Stephen Black, right? So that's good, right? It is inexorable, Sharon says. Yeah, I think that's a good word. Philip says it's flashy and alluring and everything, but in the end, it's not profitable to humans. Profitable, Philip, is a really interesting word here, right? You'd say it looks like Stephen Black has reaped an enormous profit, right? His room is full of treasures, and it's not just money, like the 25 magical guineas, but it's treasures. Huge treasures. Good, yeah. Kevin Ulrich says that we see that Stephen is a very honest guy and doesn't want people manipulated for his good, and the manipulation is the key thing here, right? So I agree with both of the two halves of your statement. One, that we see fairy magic consistently manipulating people and pushing them, as Stephen says, to act against their natures, or as Stephen thinks anyway. That's what he objects to. They are acting against their natures. So fairy magic causes people to act in unnatural ways. Even the way in which nobody notices this stuff, right? None of his friends seem to think there was anything remarkable. I love the moment. There's another very similar line of understatement when he gets the scepter, right? When he almost catches the thief who happens to be stealing this Anglo-Saxon scepter, and the guy who was desperate to recover it finds him and says that he should really keep it for his effort in attempting to catch the thief. And I love the understatement involved in the next sentence when his servants, who were running along with him to chase after the thief, all nod as if they saw the sense in this, right? Fairy magic at work, right? This is not normal. This is not natural. Fairy magic is twisting not only the perceptions of people, making them see things that aren't there, but twisting the very nature of things. Yeah, good. Chris Swank says, it's like a perverse Cinderella where the fairy godfather is dragging a reluctant mortal to the ball. Yeah, I mean, it does turn that fairy tale on its head, right? Oh, I wish I could go to the ball, but I need the intervention of a fairy to make it possible, right? Yeah, it's this horrible, twisted inversion of the Cinderella story. Yeah. No, I think that's a great parallel, or sort of anti-parallel, Chris. Yeah. Okay, so good, Rachel. I think this is an excellent point. Rachel Draper says there seems to be a great divide between what fairies think people want versus what people actually want. Or maybe the fairy is giving Stephen what many people would want, but not what Stephen specifically wants. They are victims of a generalization. Maybe. I'm not sure it's just a generalization. That is, I'm not sure that anybody else, anyone else other than Stephen Black would be no end pleased, but just by a piece of ill luck, the fairy here has lighted upon the one man in London who doesn't care for these things. I mean, there's an element of that, I think. Stephen does seem to be a remarkable person. But I don't think it's just that. I think that I agree, Rachel, with the first part of your statement, that there's a great divide between what fairies think people want and what people actually want. But notice, yeah, there is a great divide, and yet, remember Lady Pole, right after she was raised from the dead, right? How did she talk? What did she do? Yes, Brian, exactly. Brian says, Brian Yoder says, I find it interesting that the Lady Pole, who walked 20 times around the town square and wanted to dance longer than anyone, is sick and tired of processions and balls. Yeah, exactly. She loved dancing. And remember the comment that, like all girls of 19, she loved a ball, right? She loved dancing. And she, after her resurrection, of course, has this indefatigable ability to continue dancing, and finds others, the others who get tired after a mere 3 hours of dancing, to be poor, weak creatures, right? She pities them. So how wrong is he? Now you can say he's already twisting her, but notice the narrator's right. Kitty and Lydia love a ball too, in Pride and Prejudice, right? They're not even 19 yet, but anyway, it is normal, right? Most people would like money coming to them, right? He's not totally right. So now, again, Rachel, I'm not disagreeing with you. I think your observation is an awesome observation, and we see this again and again, right? It's not that the gentleman with the thistledown hair, I don't believe that he's toying with Stephen. He seems to be perfectly in earnest with Stephen. He seems to believe that he's actually pleasing Stephen Black. But Stephen Black is not pleased. As you say, Rachel, there is a great divide between what he thinks is going to please Stephen and what actually pleases Stephen. We see Stephen being continually tormented by what the gentleman with the thistledown hair is doing for him and to him and around him. Right? And Lady Pole appears to be in the same situation. And yet, he's not just from Mars, right? He's not just coming in and totally failing in all ways to understand humans. He just doesn't quite get it, right? Kate, excellent point. So Kate Neville says very sensibly, okay, money, yes. Like the money that the overseer came and gave him from that, phantom bet, yes. But scepters? Crowns? Kate asks. What can a servant do with them? Thistledown is actually quite old-fashioned. Yes. Why? So, is he completely mistaken? about the crown and the scepter and the orb? Is that in fact a ludicrously inappropriate gift for Stephen? Good. I agree, Janice. Agree with Janice Hopper and James Lebeck, both of whom are saying that, Janice, I'll quote you, the gentleman is giving Stephen what the gentleman thinks Stephen deserves, not what Stephen thinks he deserves, or not what Stephen wants. Yes, and as Carita says, Thistledown perceives royalty, and that's enough. Yes, but there's more. He's not made this idea up out of whole cloth. This is not merely the gentleman with the thistledown hair arbitrarily deciding, Stephen, you are awesome. I'm going to make you king just because I can, right? As Brian Yoder appropriately reminds us, the servant said he must be a prince, right? Yeah, he has that air of authority. The gentleman with the thistledown hair is perceiving something that everybody else perceived about him too. The white servants who set out to show disdain for him, who look at him and say, there is no way I am taking orders from a black man, right? Remember? They look at him with intending to snub him and be on their dignity, yet find themselves obeying him implicitly. And from this they conclude that that he must be a king in his own native land. And so it's his intrinsic native kingliness that brings out this respect, right? That is to say, the gentleman with the thistledown hair appears to be perceiving something that other people are perceiving too. He's not just it's not arbitrary. It's not totally capricious. He's very insistent on it, right? Stephen's uncomfortable with it. But it doesn't come from nowhere, any more than let's take Lady Pole to the ball every night comes from nowhere either, right? That's what she likes, right? She should be no end pleased. Yeah. Sharon Huff says, I was wondering at this point and throughout the story, is the gentleman also trying to set up Stephen in place of the Raven King? Well, I don't know. We don't have enough data to answer that question yet, Sharon. But, I couldn't help but think that either. Again, especially when you notice the crowns are the same. And, okay, the Raven King isn't himself literally black, right? But this association of, he is the Black King, right? And there is a connection between the two, it would seem, right? A bunch of connections, right? Once you start once you start the exercise, compare and contrast Stephen Black and the Raven King, right? You can go there, right? There are lots of connections you can make. The blackness, right? The kingliness, the 1 foot in Fairy and 1 foot in England, right? There you go. Carita says she keeps wanting me to say that the gentleman with the thistledown hair isn't crazy, so she can argue with me. No, I agree with you, Carita. He's crazy, but he's not coming from nowhere. The things, what he's doing to them, they receive them as afflictions. They are miserable, but he is not without reason to think that he is doing them a favor. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that, Tom. Tom says that Stephen, of course, also means crown in Greek. You mean, is that what Stephen means in Greek? It means crown? I had no idea. Oh. Well, how about that? Oh. Yeah, like Saint Stephen. Anyway, but yeah, right. So Stephen, okay, means both of them. So there you go. See, so Stephen Black, his very name means Black. Is it Raven King, Stephen Black, right? Right? Look at that. It's just mirror images of each other, right? Yeah. Okay. Got it. Good. Okay. I'm going to let you go. I'm keeping you late tonight. I want to come back to the magic of Mr. Strange next time. And certainly I want to be talking about, which will lead us to looking at the magic that Jonathan Strange does. And, of course, specifically his time in the war with the Duke of Wellington. Yeah. Philip Menzies says Stephen Black is kind of like Sirius Black, but not so obvious. Yeah, I agree. Not quite so obvious. Yeah, very good. Anyway, okay. So more next time. We'll keep thinking about the Raven King. We're going to focus on Jonathan Strange and especially his time in the Peninsula in the war with the Duke of Wellington. That'll be a lot of fun. So. Thank you, everybody, for an awesome class tonight, and I look forward to more of the... I have to admit that Jonathan Strange's time in the Peninsula was probably the part of the book that I enjoyed the most. I absolutely loved the time with the Duke of Wellington, so I look forward to discussing it with you next week. Thanks very much. Don't forget, next Tuesday, right? The 13th? Next Tuesday night, our... interview with Jim Butcher should be a really good time at 8 o'clock on Tuesday night. You can go to our events page there that I was showing you to register. Thanks very much, everybody. Good night.